Hello everyone. The city of Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota is home to a large Vietnamese community known for its closeness and mutual support. Yet this very place is also one of the hotspots for domestic violence, where hidden cracks behind closed doors can lead to irreversible tragedies. And on a day in late September 2017, something horrifying unfolded once again. A strange emergency call, a crime scene without blood, no violent struggle, yet one that left a haunting reminder of a deep-rooted societal problem. A gentle, hardworking woman, loved by colleagues and friends, had resolved to free herself from a broken marriage, but before she could do so, tragedy struck. What exactly happened to this woman? Before we dive into the details, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming cases on Vietnamese Case Files. Thank you for your support. At 8:43 in the morning on September 25th, 2017, the 911 call center received a call from a man. On the other end, his trembling voice stuttered as he vaguely said, "My wife didn't make it," and that he needed help. Despite the fragmented explanation, the dispatcher understood that a serious situation was unfolding and immediately sent police officers and medical personnel to the address on West 61st Street. When authorities arrived, the caller was already standing outside, waiting, his face pale with shock. He led the officers down to the basement bathroom and choked out the words that his wife was no longer breathing. Who had done this terrible thing? What exactly had happened that morning? To answer these questions, aside from the caller's statement, the forensic and crime scene teams needed to step in to collect every objective clue with the highest precision. Inside the house, even the most seasoned investigators were stunned by the scene. The woman's body lay curled up in the shower, her head leaning against the corner beneath the shower head as if she had been trying to shrink away from violence. Around her neck was a dark purple ligature mark, consistent with the size of a thin electrical cord like a phone charger cable. Indeed, a phone charging cable was found discarded on the floor next to the victim's body, a silent witness to the crime that had occurred. The cramped bathroom showed signs of a struggle. A few bottles of shampoo and personal items had fallen, and the shower curtain was pushed aside. Everything suggested that the victim had fought desperately to escape when she was suddenly attacked. There were no signs of forced entry or missing belongings. Thus, robbery or an intruder could be ruled out. All suspicion pointed towards someone inside the household. To investigators, finding a wife dead in her own bathroom with signs of violence was a classic indicator of a domestic homicide, and this time the suspect was present at the scene. Police quickly secured the area, photographed the scene, and collected evidence. The phone charger cable was sealed for forensic analysis. The victim's body was taken in by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner for autopsy to determine the precise cause and time of death. Meanwhile, the caller was invited to the station for questioning. Shortly after the police arrived, the identities of both the victim and the suspect were clearly established. The woman found in the bathroom was Mai Wong Huing Trong, also known as Michelle, 48 years old, a petite but strong Vietnamese woman who lived and worked in Minnesota with her husband. They had 2 grown sons. Michelle was described by her friends as a devoted wife, caring mother, and a successful businesswoman in the community. Around 2013, the couple opened Pen Nails Spa in the city of Richfield. With her skillful techniques and friendly demeanor, Michelle quickly built a large base of loyal customers. Many clients adored her so much that they followed her from salon to salon, eventually becoming regulars when she opened her own shop. Beyond her business, Michelle was also remembered for her generous heart and her talent for traditional Vietnamese cooking. She often invited friends and longtime customers to her home to enjoy Vietnamese meals she prepared herself. In her family, Michelle was the nurturing figure who loved her husband and 2 sons deeply. Friends said she was especially proud of her boys and dedicated a great deal of time to raising and guiding them. Michelle's husband, the man who made the emergency call, was Tony Le, a 55-year-old Vietnamese-American who was born in Vietnam before immigrating to the United States in the 1990s. Throughout their 20 years of marriage, Tony fulfilled the role of husband and father in a typical immigrant household. He and his wife built Pen Nails Spa together and was respected by friends and coworkers for his hardworking nature. Many acquaintances said Tony was a quiet, reserved man who rarely socialized outside of work and family. With such background information, no one would have expected a homicide to occur in this family. They had no known enemies, nor were there signs of burglary. What hidden truth lay behind this tragedy? Minneapolis police, in collaboration with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, immediately launched a thorough investigation. Soon, promising findings from the forensic and crime scene teams helped unravel the mystery. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner concluded that the victim died from asphyxiation caused by ligature strangulation. Specifically, the hyoid bone in her neck was fractured and the soft tissues around the trachea were hemorrhaged, classic signs of pressure applied by a tightening object. There were no other fatal injuries, indicating the killer did not use additional weapons. The time of death was early dawn on September 25th. Moreover, the forensic report noted fibers and skin particles under the victim's fingernails, likely from the suspect's clothing or skin. This proved she fought fiercely before collapsing. These findings matched the scratch marks found on Tony Lay, strengthening the theory of a struggle inside the bathroom. Further forensic analysis showed that the phone charging cable, the suspected murder weapon, contained DNA from both the victim and Tony Lay. Among the evidence collected at the scene, one document drew particular attention from investigators. Michelle's divorce petition, prepared and ready to be filed with the court. This crucial clue pointed toward a potential motive. The proposed theory was that the couple's marriage was far less harmonious than it appeared, and Michelle's intent to pursue a divorce may have triggered Tony Lay's violent jealousy. It sounded plausible, but to confirm it, investigators still needed a confession from the suspect himself. At the investigative office, Tony Lay initially remained silent, but within minutes he broke down in tears and began confessing everything. In his first statement, Tony said that he and his wife had a heated argument earlier that dawn. He admitted that he had lost control out of rage and jealousy when his wife mentioned wanting to end the marriage. Tony recounted in detail how he followed her into the bathroom, grabbed the nearby iPhone charging cable, looped it around her neck from behind, and pulled tightly. After committing the act, Tony panicked, drove to his sister's house to confess everything, and then called the police. His entire statement was recorded, transcribed, and signed voluntarily. This became a powerful confession, as the suspect admitted guilt without coercion. However, to complete the full picture, investigators still needed testimonies from additional witnesses. Tony Lay's sister confirmed that early on September 25th, her brother had come banging on her door in a frantic state before confessing to harming his wife. She added that Tony had always been a calm husband, but recently showed signs of stress and jealousy, suspecting his wife of infidelity. The victim's son told investigators that his mother had wanted a divorce for some time. He said his parents often argued about the business and finances of the nail salon. Notably, he confirmed that his mother had met with a divorce lawyer a few days earlier. Close friends of the victim were also interviewed. They said Michelle had confided that she had a new boyfriend and planned to leave her husband, though her friends were unsure how true it was. These statements aligned with what Tony Lay claimed on the night of the incident, that Michelle told him she had a new partner and was going to leave him. Thus, the motive of jealousy and fear of losing his wife became quite clear. Additionally, police reviewed neighborhood security footage to confirm external details. A neighbor's camera captured Michelle driving home at around 3:15 in the morning on September 25th, with her car's headlights turning into the driveway. Not long after, the camera recorded Tony Lay leaving the house at around 4 o'clock, likely when he went to his sister's home. There were no signs of any unfamiliar person nearby at that time. This perfectly matched Tony's confession. Furthermore, the victim's phone was examined, showing an unsent message draft to a friend from the night of September 24th. In it, Michelle wrote, "He is too jealous. I'm exhausted." Although the message was never sent, the data remained on the device, helping reveal her emotional state shortly before the tragedy. During the investigation, Tony Lay's attorney hired a psychological expert to assess his mental condition. The aim was to determine whether Tony had committed the act under severe emotional distress. The psychological evaluation concluded that Tony did not suffer from any severe mental illness, but did show signs of acute emotional disturbance. Specifically, at the moment of the crime, he entered a state of jealousy-driven frenzy, losing control for a short period of time. The expert noted that this was not a premeditated attack, but an impulsive one. However, under Minnesota law, this factor could not exonerate him. Police also acknowledged Tony's remorse and briefly considered whether the incident could have been an accident, but given the clear confession and forensic evidence, that possibility was swiftly ruled out. All clues pointed toward one single scenario, that Tony Lay, consumed by jealousy, killed his wife in the bathroom during the early hours of September 25th, 2017. From the suspect's confession, witness statements, and extensive forensic evidence, police were able to reconstruct the full sequence of the crime. On September 24, 2017, Michelle left the Pen Nails Spa Salon late in the afternoon. She decided to attend a small gathering with a few friends to lift her spirits. At that time, Michelle was emotionally torn. She had met with a divorce attorney 3 days earlier and planned to have a definitive conversation with her husband about ending the marriage. At the gathering, there were reports that Michelle had met a male friend she felt drawn to, possibly the new boyfriend she mentioned to others. Although the relationship was only beginning, Michelle was ready for an independent life after marriage. That night, she gathered all her courage to tell Tony the truth. As for Tony Lay, he was home alone that night. Tony knew his wife was attending a gathering and felt uneasy and suspicious. In recent days, Michelle often came home late and barely spoke to him, making Tony sense something was wrong. Ever since her recent trip to Vietnam, he felt she had become increasingly distant. In the quiet house, Tony sat waiting, his mind spinning with jealous thoughts where his wife was, who she was with, and why she still had not returned. Every ticking second on the clock only fueled the simmering fire of jealousy inside him. At around 3:15 in the morning on September 25th, 2017, headlights flashed outside the window. Michelle returned home later than usual. She gently opened the door, hoping her husband was asleep. But Tony Lay was still awake, sitting in the dark living room. Within minutes, the couple began arguing, their voices rising rapidly. Tony confronted his wife about what she had been hiding and whether she had someone else, which would explain her strange behavior recently. At that moment, Michelle decided to tell the truth. She openly said she no longer wanted to continue the marriage, that she had someone new, and she was ready to end the relationship. Those words stunned Tony. In an instant, rage, pain, and jealousy exploded inside the 55-year-old man. It was now 3:30 in the morning. After hearing her declaration, Tony rushed toward Michelle, his face tightened with anger, screaming and accusing her of betrayal. Terrified, Michelle ran into the basement bathroom and locked the door to escape her husband's fury. The small bathroom became her temporary refuge. Inside, Michelle stood trembling, her heart pounding. Outside, Tony furiously pounded on the door, screaming in a jealous frenzy. Losing control, he looked around for anything he could use to break in or restrain her. On the shelf near the bathroom door, he noticed Michelle's cell phone plugged in to charge. A thought flashed through his mind. Tony yanked the phone charger from the outlet. It was a thin cable, about 1 meter long, with 2 small plastic connectors. Ironically, a device meant for connection and communication was about to become a weapon to take a life. Inside the bathroom, Michelle heard the noise and cracked the door open to check. Suddenly, Tony shoved the door wide open. Standing before her was a man she barely recognized, eyes bloodshot, face twisted in rage, holding a cable in his hand. Michelle panicked and tried to escape, but it was too late. Tony Lay charged at her like a wild beast, using his strength to wrap the charging cable around her neck from behind. She tried to scream, but her voice was cut off as her windpipe was compressed. In less than a minute, Michelle's resistance weakened and then ceased entirely. She collapsed onto the bathroom floor, her body curled up in the corner of the shower. Only when Michelle lay motionless did Tony loosen his grip, letting the cable fall onto the cold tile floor. Around him, personal items were scattered, and the mirror was smudged with small streaks of blood from scratches on Tony's hand. A chilling silence filled the room. The frenzy dissipated, and Tony Lay stood panting, staring blankly at his wife's lifeless body. In his mind, he still seemed unable to comprehend what he had just done. At 3:40 in the morning, Tony Lay finally snapped out of his daze. Seeing the horrifying scene he had caused, he collapsed beside his wife's body. He shook her desperately, calling out to her in vain. As the realization of what he had done hit him, Tony was consumed by both fear and remorse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, shedding tears that came far too late. In that moment, the 55-year-old man understood he had lost everything because of a single moment of madness. Realizing his wife was gone, Tony struggled to decide what to do next. For a brief moment, the thought of ending his own life flashed through his mind as he stared at the charger cable. But then Tony thought of his children. In the end, he decided to turn himself in. First, he needed emotional support, and the first person he thought of was his older sister, the only family member living nearby. At around 4 in the morning, Tony Lay left the house and drove a few blocks to her home. He rang the doorbell, dazed, with small bloodstains still on his clothes. When his sister opened the door, Tony immediately lunged toward her, hugging her tightly and breaking down in confession. At first, she believed he was speaking in panic and not thinking clearly. But when Tony fell to his knees begging for forgiveness, she realized this was a horrifying truth. The siblings held each other and cried in anguish. Once she regained her composure, Tony's sister urged him to call the police. After several hours of calming down and gathering courage, at nearly 8:30 in the morning, Tony Lay picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. That fateful call alerted authorities to his wife's death, marking the beginning of the legal process. By 8:43, Minneapolis police arrived at the scene and arrested Tony Lay. With sufficient evidence in hand, on September 26, 2017, just one day after the incident, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office officially charged Tony Lay. The indictment stated clearly that he had intentionally caused his wife's death and emphasized jealousy over her desire for a divorce as the motive. Bail was set by the district court at $1.5 million USD, reflecting the severity of the crime. Tony Lay was held at the county jail awaiting trial. His trial was held at the Hennepin County District Court. Due to the clarity of the case and his confession, prosecutors did not pursue a higher charge. However, the proposed sentence remained extremely harsh. The Office of Prosecutor Mike Freeman recommended a sentence of 306 months, equivalent to 25 years and 6 months, based on Minnesota's sentencing guidelines. In January 2019, Tony Lay unexpectedly changed course and chose to plead guilty instead of going to trial. During the plea hearing on January 10th, 2019, Tony Lay responded through an interpreter, admitting responsibility for his wife's death. This plea eliminated the need for a jury trial and allowed the court to move directly to sentencing. Tony's defense attorney, Ryan Gary, explained that they initially planned to argue a crime committed in a moment of emotional heat in hopes of reducing the charge to manslaughter. However, Tony insisted on pleading guilty, saying he wanted both families to suffer less. Perhaps after more than a year in jail, his conscience awakened enough to push him to face the truth and accept responsibility. The sentencing hearing took place on February 12, 2019. The atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with sorrow and outrage. Representatives of the victim's family were allowed to speak in court. One by one, they tearfully described the tragic woman they had lost. A niece who called Michelle D pleaded through sobs for the court to impose the harshest possible sentence to bring justice for her aunt. The victim's brother also firmly insisted that Tony must pay a deserving price. Hearing their words, Tony Lay lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. He too was given a chance to speak his final words. In a short statement, Tony tearfully spoke in Vietnamese, expressing profound remorse and apologizing to his wife's family and his children. He said he loved his wife deeply but lost control, and that he would live with regret for the rest of his life. Several of Tony's relatives and friends submitted 16 letters requesting leniency, describing him as a good husband in the past and saying this act was an unusual outburst. The defense attorney used these letters to request mercy, asking for a 15-year sentence and arguing that Tony's actions were less severe than a typical second-degree murder. However, prosecutors and investigators strongly rejected this view. They emphasized that Tony Lay strangled his wife to death in a brutal manner, something far beyond a momentary loss of control. The prosecution pointed out that the prolonged pressure required to make the victim lose consciousness demonstrated clear intent to kill, not an accident. Moreover, after Michelle collapsed, Tony did not provide aid or call for help. Immediately, he left for several hours, showing utter disregard after the crime. Sitting on the prosecution's side, many members of the victim's family shook their heads upon hearing the defense's plea. They believed Tony deserved the full punishment for his cruel actions. After hearing both sides, Judge Jay Quam entered deliberation before returning with the verdict. He announced that the court accepted the defendant's guilty plea to second-degree murder and would issue a sentence within the guideline range, with certain considerations. Judge Quam stated that Tony Le's actions were extremely serious, but the court also recognizes his acceptance of responsibility and lack of prior criminal history. Ultimately, the court sentenced Tony Le to 261 months in prison, equivalent to approximately 21 years and 9 months. This was the lowest end of the sentencing guideline for this charge. Upon hearing the sentence, Tony Le burst into tears, while the victim's family appeared somewhat disappointed, believing the punishment was still too lenient. The judge explained that he had considered Tony's remorse and clean record, so he did not choose the highest penalty. Even so, it remained a very severe sentence. At nearly 60 years old, Tony Le would spend most of the rest of his life behind bars. Under Minnesota law, he must serve 2/3 of the sentence in prison, about 14 to 15 years, before being eligible for supervised release for the remaining 1/3. Since Tony had been held in custody since 2017, that time would be credited toward his sentence. He is expected to remain in prison at least until around 2032 before he may be eligible for release. After the sentencing, Tony Le appealed for a reduced sentence, arguing that 21 years was too harsh for what he claimed was an act committed in a moment of anger. However, in February 2020, the Minnesota Court of Appeals upheld the original sentence, affirming that the punishment imposed on Tony Le was appropriate and not excessive. The appellate court emphasized that the severity of Tony's actions was comparable to other malicious homicide cases. With this ruling, Tony Le's legal journey effectively came to an end. He must now serve the sentence handed down, with no further path of appeal. The case of Tony Le concluded with a just punishment for the perpetrator, but its echoes continue to shock the Vietnamese community in Minneapolis. It was a heartbreaking family tragedy, the victim, a gentle wife who endured much emotional suffering, and the perpetrator, a husband consumed by jealousy who destroyed everything. On social media and in local news outlets, the story was widely shared as a stark reminder of the dangers of hidden domestic violence. Many readers expressed sorrow for Michelle, a beloved woman who contributed to her community, yet ultimately died at the hands of the person who should have protected her. The incident also reignited discussions about jealousy, control, and cultural dynamics within marriage. Some argued that the lingering mindset of a husband's authority over his wife in certain Asian households can fuel disaster when a man cannot accept his wife's independence or desire for divorce. And what about you? Do you think the sentence given to Tony Le was appropriate? Share your thoughts in the comments below for Vietnamese Case Files. And if you found today's content compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you won't miss future true crime stories. Goodbye, and see you next time.